Welcome, everybody. This is Wine Wednesday with the Maryland Wineries Association. I'm Kevin Addix, coming to you live from a nice little outdoor porch location. I'm hoping the Wi-Fi keeps up. I want to add in our guest of the day. I'm thrilled to have him on, Eric Rice. Eric Rice is with us today from Willow Oaks Cidery in beautiful Frederick County. Eric, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We're honored to be here. We're excited to talk about it and taste a few ciders today.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you, and you're doing some really cool things in Washington County, and I can't wait to talk through them. But first, tell us a little bit about Willow Oaks and how long you've been open, and kind of what's your product line and focus.
Sure will. So I guess not quite sure where to start with that, but we are the longest established organic farm.
And that is a freeze frame, so I'll come back to him once he comes back up. All right, Eric, looks like you're back.
Yeah, so we're the longest. That was a lightning strike. So that we are the longest established organic farm in the state, and perhaps the oldest organic orchard in the East, certainly in the Middle Atlantic states. We have been open and selling cider now for about 3 years. We've had our license for a good bit longer than that. We've needed our license longer than that because most of all of our ciders take at least 2 years to make from the time we start until they actually get into a bottle to be available to you. And some of them take 3 years and some of them take 4 years. And so we've been at it for a little while, and we're excited about it. So we have our farm. We bought the property in 1985 and planted the first apple trees that year and the first pear tree that year. And interestingly, we're going to taste ciders from each of those trees today and talk about them. And so the first thing that I planted was a black twig apple, and the second thing I planted was a Chijuro Asian pear. And so each of those is the basis of some of our ciders, and one of our ciders for sure in each of those, and of our new dessert wines that we now have out. We are in Western Frederick County, in the Middletown Valley, and a lovely view, a very nice place to be. And I'm sitting upstairs in the loft of our tasting room with the lights on because we have a huge storm blowing in. Great big red cells all over the place on the weather map. And so, we trust that we will get through this afternoon. If I disappear, I'll be back. And so, I think I need to say that. Should also say, we grow our own fruit from which we make the cider. We get just a little bit of organic fruit from our friends Sunnyside down in Washington, Virginia.
So I will say that this is Eric right now in the middle of that mess. Eric, I'm just showing everybody what we're up against here.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. the visual helps.
We're hoping that mess doesn't pick apples. We're hoping that mess doesn't. We're picking blackberries like crazy right now.
Are you?
And we're hoping that it doesn't pick them for us.
So can I jump in and ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
So you mentioned Asian pears, which is one of my ultimate favorite fruits. What made you think that Asian pears would be a good fit?
So it was a guess. If you really want to know the truth, they have okay sugar. Some of them have really good sugar. They have really good acid, which most European pears don't. And so if we're thinking about making cider, like wine, good cider requires that we have, sugar, acid, and tannin. Well, Asian pears don't really have much in the way of tannin, but they do have the other two. And we have some French cider pears that are in the orchard that also now bring us some tannin. So we're working on a new perry that will incorporate them into
another freeze frame from Eric. So he's getting lightning strikes there.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's nature.
It is Mother Nature speaking to us here this afternoon. So we thought the Asian pears would really do that. And I confess that I planted Chijuro the second item because when I was in graduate school, one of the years I was there was this Asian pear tree. Well, there was a tree that I walked by on the way to campus every day. And as fruit got ripe on that tree, they smelled good. And they were hanging over the fence. And so I pilfered a few. I pilfered a lot. And so, every day as I walked by, I would eat one of these things. And I finally, the second year, when they were still there, and nobody was picking them, which I thought was interesting. And so the second year I was there, I started feeling guilty. I mean, after all, I'm a preacher's kid, right? And so I started feeling guilty because, maybe I was stealing. And so I went up and knocked on the person's door, and it turned out to be the widow of a botany professor at Carolina.
I'm going to quote that, Eric Rice, the preacher's kid.
Yeah. So it turned out to be the widow of a botany professor.
So if you're just joining us, Eric's coming in and out as the lightning strikes. So there, he's back.
Yeah. So the widow of a botany professor, and I asked her what this thing was, and she said, well, it's an Asian pear. I know I have the name. It's back on my husband's desk in his stuff. And so back she goes, and she comes out, and she spells it for me. And I wrote it down, and I thought, okay, I'm planting that.
Yeah.
And so whatever happens in my life, if I have a piece of property somewhere, and at that time, I wasn't sure it was going to be a farm or orchard, but somewhere that might happen. I was going to plant a Jejuro pear, and so we planted it. And truthfully, some fermented, and because Mother Nature helps. Mm-hmm. And so the first perry was an accidental perry, and I went, oh, this is pretty good. I was sort of like my first effort to make wine was really not an effort. It was in college on the windowsill when I forgot something. And, Mother Nature took over and helped me do that. And, being a kid.
And I'll jump in just to say that when Eric mentions perry is pear cider. When you think of cider is generally apple based, and pear would be pear cider. Perry is pear cider, correct?
Correct.
Essentially.
And that's exactly what it is. And when it's a perry, it has no apple in it at all.
Right.
And so if it has any apple in it, it has to be called cider. So we actually do 3 perries, and then we do a set of ciders across the portfolio. So our ciders. And we'll take a couple of these.
Yeah, let's jump into that. Why don't you get started with one, and we'll talk about it as we roll.
Right. So our ciders, we start with all in. And so the all-in is exactly what it sounds like. It's all the apples that we have out there. We grow about 20 heritage American apples, and then 2 or 3 modern American apples as well. But the all-in is all the apples that's there. Now, we actually do 2 types of blend that work for all-in. We do a field blend where we think about what we're going to put in this bin and in the cooler to be the next barrel of cider. We ferment in small batches in oak barrels, neutral oak barrels, and then we finish in mostly neutral oak barrels. The fermentation is low and slow. It takes between 8 and 10 months. It's at about 56 degrees or thereabouts. And so it takes a very long time. We actually use the yeasts that come in from the orchard, and that's quite intentional. Different apples have different yeasts come in, which is pretty interesting. So they taste a little bit different depending on what you end up putting into that blend out in the orchard, which is part of what we do. So, paying attention to that is part of the deal. Now, the all-in is, as we said, all the apples that are out there. And this one just has you can notice just a little bit of fizz.
And I'll jump back on to say Eric Rice from Willow Oaks is holding ground as a major set of storms rolls through. So he's back again.
I'm sorry, folks.
Oh, it's all right.
We're not responsible for Mother Nature, but there you go. Well, we are.
Well,
we are.
In some respects, yes.
In some respects, we certainly are responsible for Mother Nature, but that's another story. So this one has just the slightest fizz, natural fermentation, and really nice apple aroma. It is intended to be a dry cider with robust aroma, a bigness to it. It has because it has all of our apples in it, it brings sugar, acid, and a little bit of tannin. Not as much as, for example, the black twig, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but a little bit of tannin and a little bit of effervescence. It has very bright acid, and so it dances on your tongue. And so imagine it as a dry, robust cider with really good aroma. And we have found.
Give Eric a second to come back from a lightning strike.
Sorry. So are we back yet? You know, I'm freezing up. You aren't, which is right.
So can I jump in with a question? You said it's all in, which means it's all different types of apples. So you've got heirloom apples and you've got some of the modern apples. What are some of the modern varieties?
So we actually only have 3 modern apples in the place. We have some Gala that are left over from our first experiment. We have a little Empire that is a very nice aromatic apple in terms of an addition to cider. And then we have a little Liberty. And we use Liberty in some things where we'd like to have a little malic acid. Because it's one of the very few apples, I think there are only 2 or 3 that actually have malic acid. And so we use that where we would like to have a little bit. This doesn't really have any Liberty in it. So when I say all in, it's got all of that, would be honest, because we don't want the malolactic fermentation in this. So it's nice, robust, aromatic, very dry. We don't sulfite. We don't sulfite.
Got another brief breakup here.
Yeah. Sorry.
Hey, we're rolling with it. So
we don't sulfite. We use the yeast that comes in, and we also don't sulfite at the end, but rather, that's part of using the yeast that comes in. It has enough alcohol tolerance to get us to 7.5 or 8, but it's not going to have enough alcohol tolerance to do any more. And that's about what these are going to do. Now, some of the others, like the black twigs, got a higher alcohol content. The yeast that comes in on the black twig apple is different. The tannin in the skin's a little different, so it ends up attracting a different yeast out there. And that, when the black twig comes in, we'll talk about that in a minute. I should say, in terms of the all-in, a very refreshing afternoon drink. Yeah, that's a commercial. It's a refreshing afternoon drink, and since we're looking at a wine and cheese weekend, we would heartily suggest that this is really good with a cheddar, and so that is the kind of pairing that I think would work particularly well with this. One of our colleagues here at the cider, his husband is a cheesemaker, and we were getting ready to have our first cheese tasting last spring when we shut down for COVID. And so we look forward to that coming back one of these days.
Yeah, and that's actually a nice segue as we jump to the next cider you've got there. So this Saturday is National Wine and Cheese Day, and we encourage you to cheese and wine responsibly, which means you must cheese and wine at least once. Eric, what do you think makes a good cider to pair with cheese? I mean, I have apples with cheese all the time, so I would say any cider, but correct. Okay.
I personally, back up. So I have a huge bias. I guess I've become a cider snob, if I'm really honest about it. I really like what heritage apples do because they have.
Eric will be back momentarily.
And so
we've been having little glitches as we go here.
Let me know when we're here.
You're back.
Okay. So I think any cider works, but I think it needs to be dry, and depending on the type of cheese, there needs to be a certain robustness to that cider. And so and mostly heritage ciders give you that if folks treat them right. Part of the difference between an heirloom cider, which is what we are, between an heirloom cider and a lot of other commercial ciders, is that they use dessert apples. And dessert apples have been bred so that almost all the acid is gone and all the tannin is gone. And so when you do that, then you just have sugar. And when you use a commercial cider or wine yeast with just that sugar, you get a lot of bland. And so that's just the truth. I mean, again, I realize I'm a cider snob and I'm not trying to throw off on anybody, but that happens. And so we think that the character, so you're looking for a cider with character to stand up.
You know, we're grateful for these storms because they're hopefully going to bring some relief to the heat, but they're making connections a little difficult. Eric, you're back.
Okay, and we're back. I don't know where I was when I left because I can't tell.
Well, let's you basically agreed that wine and cheese or cider and cheese are a pairing, so have some.
They are, and Perry works with cheese too, I have to say.
Yeah. And
you know, those are things just to know. I mean, for example, the Black Twig.
Yeah.
Which is, so the Black Twig is a varietal cider. It's just Black Twig apples. As everyone on the call knows, you have to have at least 75% of a variety to call it a varietal. And this one's just Black Twig. A Black Twig apple, and this is a Black Twig. I'm going to walk over so you can see it. So this is a Black Twig apple from last fall. And so this beauty right here is a Black Twig apple. It's gnarly. It was the first thing that I planted here. I met it in graduate school in the mountains of North Carolina and fell in love with it. It's hard as a brick in the fall. It keeps all the way, well, we're eating them now. We're still eating them here. And they're still quite good. And so we recommend it. It has the same proportion of acid, sugar, and tannin that a red wine grape has, which is pretty interesting. And so it ends up making a cider that's really a white wine with tannin, which is pretty interesting, I think. And a cider that is robust and aromatic and lingers. And so the all-in is by comparison is a bit of a lighter cider, to be quite honest. So that's our Black Twig, and excuse me, and I'm very fond of it. And it pairs with all kinds of things. It'll pair with cheddar. It'll pair with cheese. The chef who did a tasting dinner, an experimental tasting dinner for us last year, actually ended up pairing this with a borscht, which was really, really good. And
that's great.
And I must say that they work terrifically together. So it's not intended to have any natural fizz that's left, any natural carbonation. It is a still cider. In fact, we do 4 that are heirloom ciders. And so the Black Twig is one. And as many of you probably know, it was the basis of Andrew Jackson's cider business. That president made his living doing that and distilling it in Tennessee, and he's probably saved it at the Hermitage. We also do a Pippin, straight up Pippin, which was George Washington's cider apple. We do a confluence, and we call it that. It is a combination of Spitzenberg and Winesap, both of which Mr. Jefferson grew. And so we try to do that. And then we do one that's just a straight up russet. And we just call it russet. It is, after all, the oldest American apple from about 1630s and 1640s. So we use both russets. There's a golden russet and a Roxbury, and we put both of our russets in that cider.
Well, that's great. You said that other variety was Spitzenberg?
Spitzenberg. So Spitzenberg is a New York apple. Was originally a New York apple. And I think it might be the best tasting of all apples. The issue is that it doesn't store, doesn't ship, and it's fire blighty as all get out. It's the only thing in the orchard that we'll put up with fire blight to have. And so, because it's that good. And the interesting thing is that combination, the Pippin has tannin, the Black Twig has tannin, but the confluence doesn't have it. Neither Winesap nor Spitzenberg really have any tannin in them. And so we let the fruit express itself. our idea is that, you know, we want to give the fruit the opportunity. I mean, it's like any winery. You know, the quality of the product starts in the orchard or starts in the vineyard, whichever of those it is. That really determines what ends up happening in the end. And so we want to honor the fruit that's out there.
So all told, how many varieties are you growing? Apples specifically?
So let's see. We have 23 of those, and then we have recently planted 4 different French cider apples. I'm a big fan of French cider, and so we don't grow British cider apples because we can't. I mean, it's sort of that simple. That they all tend toward fire blight, and as an organic orchard and farm, we have no control for fire blight. There used to be one, and it's no longer allowed under the certification. And so we simply don't grow those varieties. And one of the lovely things about most American heirloom apples is that they're pretty fire blight resistant. And so we get strikes some, but for the most part, the tree will just wall off the strike and keep growing. And we can cut it off and go on about what we need to do.
That's great. All right, so we're down 2. Let's try another.
Okay. And so, and shall we work our way through these?
Sure. Yeah. I'll.
And then we'll come to the dessert wines because
Yes, please.
I certainly want to talk about those. So,
and I'd love for you to talk about them as well. They're delicious.
So those are. Let's do that one last. So those are 3 ciders. Here is a 4th cider. Now these are just apple. We do several ciders that we add other things that we grow too. And so one of them is called Blue Note, which we're about to taste here. And the Blue Note is our blueberries. We have about 2 acres of those over the hill here. And so we grow a lot of blueberries. And we wanted to make a cider out of it. And it's a really nice combination. We also make a cider with black currants that is my partner's favorite. That cider we call loaming. And so the black currants grow just outside the tasting room here. But we grow enough that we can make a couple of barrels a year. And so thankfully. And so that's the second one we do. We also make hoppinen. We grow Cascade hops. And then we use those with our cider so that we actually get a hopped cider with what we're doing. And right now we're working on a hot pepper cider. And so that's another one that'll have an addition to it. We found a couple, we tested all the hot, so historically we've gone to market with our farm products. And as a result, we grow a lot of different hot peppers. So we trialed a whole variety of them and found 2 that were okay, one of which was really good. And so we're working on that right now. So we do some straight apple, and then we do some ciders to which we add other fruit that we grow. And if we're lucky, well, we'll come back to that later. So
Eric, I did want to ask. So your bottles were pretty far away from them on the screen, but are they 500 ml?
They are. They're 500 ml. This is what one of them looks like. My apologies for walking across the room there.
No, they're a great size. And what's the alcohol content generally?
So the alcohol content generally is somewhere between 7 and 8.
Okay.
The black twig's a little higher, and then the dessert wines are actually 17.
Okay.
They're rather much higher. So
that little bottle there may be a heavy serving, but you could get away with it.
Yeah, probably. there are people who right now, because we're not tasting
right
here, but there are people who come and buy a bottle and spread a picnic. We have
right.
tables down in the garden and stuff like that. And so there are people who come and buy a bottle, spread a picnic, and do take care of that of a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. So the Blue Note also has just a little fizz, and it is as I said, it's a combination of all in. So it's all the apples that we're growing out there, and our blueberries, and you end up getting just a little fizz, and you end up getting a cider that, and I think you can, this is a much darker, you can see the blueberry Should have thought to have a piece of paper behind it. You could actually see the color. I don't think that works. Didn't occur to me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful color.
So, and it's aromatic of blueberry. It's suggestive of being sweet. And so you end up with, but it's not. So it's dry. It has very bright acidity, and it truly does dance on your tongue, and ends up leaving you with both an apple and blueberry aroma in the top of your mouth. And so it's a pretty nice cider as well, and it too will stand up to a cheese.
I'm sure it'd be great with a cheese,
even like a blue cheese. And so it can work with almost anything that you'd like it to work with. I think we've had it with goat cheese, we've had it with blue cheese, a few of those things as we were actually checking.
And so, Eric, no matter how much apple is in it, the minute apple gets in there, it's called a cider.
The minute apple gets in there, it's called a cider. And so, and most relatively few people make perries because European pears, as I said, they don't really have acid, they don't really have tannin, and so it's really not. It's pretty insipid. And so most folks don't do perries unless they find. And so in order to, or the perries they do, better said, you'll see them called pear ciders. And the reason they're called pear ciders is because they're trying to get some apple in there to give it backbone, to give it structure, because the European pear is just not going to do it. And so that's one of the blessings that we have by having Asian pears. And so.
Great.
Yeah, we like our own cooking. I must confess, we do. So that's, so Lori and I decided I was suggesting we ought to make cider, and she gave me the look, right? And which is not always something a guy wants to get. And so, because we had tasted ciders out and about, and we weren't sure about that. So we had to promise that we wouldn't make anything that was boring. And we had to promise that we wouldn't make any two that taste alike. Because the other thing that happens in many cideries is that you begin to not be able to differentiate between the different types of cider that they're serving to you, unless you end up having something like hops in it that has a distinct difference.
Right.
And so that's part of why we use the yeast to come in, why we're pretty careful with being clean. We have to be really careful with being clean anyway. But because we are, but that's part of why we do what we do. And I think we're mostly managing not to be boring as it comes to these. And so those are our apple ciders. And then we move to perries. And so we have 3 perries that we have in bottle and labeled and available. We have 2 more that we're actually working on. And so that we're pretty excited about. So the one that we're actually going to taste today is Apparition, and the pun is intentional in the spelling. And so here is Apparition, and so it's a combination of 2 pears. Basically, there will be a few others in there, which is so we didn't want to call it a varietal. We actually wanted to blend these because we have 2 of our Asian pears bring particular characteristics that are really pretty interesting. So one of them is a Chijuro. This is a Chijuro. Looks a little rough because just like the black twig, this has been in the cooler since being picked in October. So it's got a couple of bruises. If you go to the grocery store, you're likely to find an Asian pear that might or might not have a bruise on it, or might be in foam. And that's to keep it from doing that. It's going to get a dark spot on it whenever it's sitting next to, another Asian pear and touching it in the cooler. And so it's almost impossible not to do that. But, we're also still eating these, although we're cooking them now rather than simply eating. And so they maintain it for that long. I mentioned earlier that this was the second thing I planted after the black twig. This particular perry is made from a combination of Chijuro and a second Asian pear called Surrey, or at least those are the predominant pears that are in it. Surrey is the oldest named fruit in the world. It's from the Yellow River Valley of China. It's 3,000 years it's actually been called Surrey and grown like that. And so those were trees that we also planted in that first year. And I managed to buy those from a botany professor, a retired botany professor at Cal Davis, who had a little backyard fruit business that making trees from, signwood he had brought back from Asia, probably illegally, but that he had brought back from Asia that he had been growing for a lot of years. And so we planted it, and lo and behold, it's interesting because when the Chijuro is completely ripe, it has the inside of the skin tastes like butterscotch, which is really interesting. And when the Surrey is completely ripe, the inside of the skin tastes like pineapple. Indeed, the whole pear tastes like pineapple. And so what we end up getting from Apparition is a tropical pear, which is kind of interesting. It too has just a little brightness, just a little fizz on it, which it's supposed to have.
As you're pouring that, I will say that if those who are listening feel as though they are learning something, that's because you are learning directly in a front row from a Hopkins professor. So Eric teaches at Johns Hopkins and teaches about the craft beverage industry, among other things. And this is really fascinating stuff.
Well, thank you. So,
but how does it taste?
I'm just sniffing. So Lori and I are awful or good, whatever it may be, food sniffers of food and beverage sniffers of almost anything. And so, oh my. So it's smooth. It's pretty mellow in spite of the fact that it has really good acid that bounces on your tongue. It's bright. You get a little bit of tropical out of it. Still getting a little bit of pineapple. I'm not tasting butterscotch anymore. And so that seems to be gone, but I'm still getting just a little bit of the pineapple out of it. And that's perfectly all right. We've had, last year we had a lady come in for tasting and taste this and decided, oh, that's the champagne for my wedding because I like it way better than Chardonnay grapes, which is what's used to make the typical champagne. And so she came back and bought the champagne for her wedding. And so we were rather flattered by, I have to be honest. It is that kind of a brightness that this particular Perry brings. So, oh yeah. So we actually grow
good stuff.
We actually grow about 10 types of Asian pears. And so we grow those that will actually grow without firelight or with a controllable amount by pruning and paying attention to it. We have one out there that keeps misbehaving, one variety that may disappear and become something else before this year is over because it doesn't want to be here, and so we just assume it not be here. It really doesn't want to be here. It's time for it to move on. And so I think that's likely to happen. I will say, so we do 3 different Perrys right now. We do the Apparition that has primarily those 2 pears in it. And then we do 2 more that have all of our pears in it. One of those is Juillet, or as people call it, Juliet, because that's the way it's spelled. It wasn't quite the intent, but who's going to argue with? We're not going to argue. And so it is a combination of all of our pears plus our sour cherries. And so it ends up making a Perry that has that you get a little pear from, a little cherry from, and a little bit of almond at the end, which is pretty nice because the sour cherries actually have that as a secondary flavor. And so, which is pretty interesting and works really well with chocolate, for example.
Eric, you mentioned this time of year with what's coming out of your freezer, your cooler. What are you cooking with the Asian pear?
So
How are you cooking? How are you using it?
well, so we use, in terms of cooking it, I stew it some, and I stew it with apples and cinnamon. Or we use both of these as a side. We duck a fair amount, even though we raise cattle that a breed that wins international grass-fed taste test awards. Lori doesn't eat mammal at all, but we do eat duck, and a fair amount of it. And so we use some of our black currants with the pears and the apples to make a black currant pear compote that we serve with duck. And shallots, all four of those things together. We saute all of that together to end up making the compote for duck. And
we're available for dinner anytime, really.
we can do that. And we have space on a socially distanced deck out here, Kevin. We could actually do that. And I think we're going to build a pergola. Part of COVID is that we decided that we would go ahead and build a patio that we were going to eventually get to, and then put a pergola up because it will allow us to serve outside and have more seating space outside. And I think we're going to have to think about that this year and at least part of next year too. So that's the way that we're still eating those. And both of those ways are the ways that we're still eating those. And before these begin to get to the place that you need to cook them, we actually do a lot of salads with this Asian pear. So we grow arugula, and we have walnuts, or we'll buy walnuts. And so we do an arugula goat cheese Asian pear salad that we like quite a lot. And it's a pretty good way to start or finish dinner of an evening. And so, yeah, there you go. I see Lori saying something about which you can't read, but oh yeah. So that the other place that we pear is actually one of the best dishes she makes, which with chicken and a chicken sausage, sweet potato, apples, and pears, and my heavens, how could I forget that? And cider. And so we add cider into that as part of the liquid for doing the cooking.
I have to be honest. Sounds like we're coming up for a week now.
Well, we now have a space back here that was going to be a B&B this season. It's finished, it's ready, and that's clearly not going to be happening this year. And so perhaps over the winter things will change and that will become possible. I hope that will be the case. So anyway, those. Oh, and the third pairing, I realized that I didn't say. Third pairing, we call it pairing, and that's because we pair all the Asian pears with, we have 3 beehives, so with some of the honey and with our fresh ginger, and that ends up making a ginger. It's very ginger forward, a ginger pear pairing that has a little bit of effervescence and is, I think, really quite good. If you gotta like ginger.
Well, yeah, and it's delicious.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. And so then we're working on 2 pairings that will be along sometime. We've started an apricot cider because sort of 2 out of 5 years we get apricots, and we have an entire freezer now full of them. And it's time to use them. And so we've started an apricot cider that with the last of the pears from last year, and we'll see how that goes. We're not sure. This is an experiment. We don't know until we get there.
I'm looking forward to that. That's great.
And then we have we are trying a pairing with a combination of all of our pears and the first French cider pears, which bore this past year for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so that should be pretty interesting, because that will be, if you've ever had a French cider, that's where my intention for this to go is. We don't know whether we'll see.
I just love that you're trying, a variety of different things, from what I think a lot of folks would think for wine or cider would be exotic fruit, right? Putting currants, or not exotic in that sense, but out of the norm.
We are doing that now. Sometimes it hasn't been as. Of course. Yeah, we act, but then again, I mean, for example, we have a barrel down there of we worked on a cranberry apple cider, went to New Jersey, bought cranberries from an organic cranberry bog, came back, crushed them, did all that stuff, got it in there, and I couldn't stand the taste of it. It was just awful. And so, it's been sitting down there for a couple of years now. And, I walk by, kind of look at it and think it's stupid. And so I decided that we'd take it to the distillery, since that's a good segue to the next item. And so I thought I'd take it to the distillery, but I either made the mistake or had the good fortune of asking a couple of our friends who are cider nerds to taste it. And I believe there was talk of breaking my legs if I tried to get off the farm without bottling it. And so I think that, so I'm suspecting that it tastes like brandy. For all the world, it tastes like brandy, which is just strange.
Wow.
And so, but we'll see what that brings. So the lightning has stopped. The rain is very much here, but the lightning.
Well, that's all right. That's all right.
So go ahead.
Let's keep rolling. So you mentioned distilling. So you've got a couple of products that are basically fortified wines, right?
We do. So we have 4 that we have made, 2 of which we have labels for, 2 of which we're waiting for labels for, and in essence, all of them come from our cider. So these come from our fruit, come from our cider. So the way these critters work, it takes a while. This is sort of they're made like a port, Kevin. So they're made like a fruit port, except they're not grape, right? And the alcohol content isn't as high. These are 17% to 17.5% as opposed to above 20. And so, that's intentional on our part. We're making one is our apple dessert wine. And, we call it Harley's Keep. And so it's in a 375. And that, again, our friend Linda, Linda and Kezra have done our labels. And this one is one of Linda's, she's a painter, local. They're both local artists. Linda has now retired to Arizona, sadly, but there you go. And so this is one of her paintings that we think is just beautiful. And she's kind enough to let us use this for a label. So the way this actually works, so as we said earlier, our cider takes 2 years to get to a bottle. So when some of it's finished at 2 years, we take a bottle of All In and a bottle of Black Twig. A barrel of All In and a barrel of Black Twig, and those go to our friends at McClintock, a very good distillery here in Frederick, and they distill for us apple spirits. And so we bring those spirits home, and we mix those spirits with a finished Black Twig, barrel of Black Twig, and put that then into its own new whiskey barrel for a year to mellow and age and mature the apple spirit that's in there. And then as we get to yet another season, we use Black Twig cider that is in the process of fermenting, and stop that cider with the much higher alcohol content, the mixture of the finished Black Twig cider and the distillate that's come back, to end up making a fortified wine.
That's great.
And then that goes back in the barrel for a little while yet before it goes in the bottle. So that's the process, and we actually do that now and I'm pouring myself small amounts of each of those because I'd like to get through this without, by being able to still use complete sentences when we finish. And so, so the Harley's Keep is a nod of the head to the family from whom we bought the farm from. Bad choice of phrase. From whom we bought the property from. And so, this property had been in that family since it was a grant from the King of England. It was called More Bad Than Good, and it was aptly named, let me tell you. But they were the forebears of what then became the Harley family through marriage. And I ended up buying it from the grandson of that. It had been a continuous production for all that time, and turned that into an orchard and a farm. It was a corn, wheat, soybean, hay farm.
Right.
So So this one gets to it that way. And, we call it Harley's Keep because the family, so they built the house that was still remaining that I restored in 1830. And during the War of Southern Incursion, during the Civil War, we're out where the Confederates crossed the rivers three or four times, and three times. And during each time it came across, we're very close to Burkittsville, very close to South Mountain between those. And so each time they crossed the mountain, when they came to Middletown, when they didn't, the Harley family took their possessions and their livestock and went down on our river. We have and this is by the way, that's the mama eagle. We have a nesting pair of bald eagles down there that raise babies each year. And so they took their livestock down there and hid them under the rock overhangs while the fighting was going on in the area. Then they'd come back out. And that happened each time they did it. And so we thought that calling one of these Harley's Keep would be an appropriate homage to the family.
And Eric, tell me, as you're tasting that, now don't drink it all, but tell me, what has the collaboration been like? So you were one of the first to actually work with a distillery, and I know there's some back and forth with your collaborations there.
There are. And it's actually been terrific. We greatly appreciate them as colleagues and as friends. We also have worked together to recently do two of their releases that started out as our cider and then became their brandies. And so one of them was an apple brandy from the same. It's from a later batch than this of an apple brandy that is just stunningly good. And then the second one is a pear brandy, again from a second batch that we ended up making for the bequest. And so they've done that, and we're looking forward to doing it again this year. We have a really good apple crop, and so we imagine we have enough to share there, and we're looking forward to doing it. And they seem to be too. They do really good work.
Oh yeah.
And we feel very fortunate to have them in the area that haven't been to call them friends. I mean, it's quite lovely.
Yeah, it's a fun place to go to, especially even if you're not into spirits, but if you are into spirits, the spirits are great.
It's great, and they kindly are willing to host my entrepreneurial spirits class in the spring, which I love taking them there because the students just are completely dazzled. Many of my students. So I ended up teaching that class because a bunch of chemical engineers kept saying, we want to ferment stuff, we want to distill stuff, we want to do other things. Could we have a class? And so I pitched it, and the university actually said okay, which surprised me, but they did. Good for them. And so we have students, many of whom are chemical engineers, who come there with the prospect of thinking about going into this industry one way or another. And so, which I rather like. I think it's fun.
Oh yeah.
And you kindly come talk with them.
Oh sure, and I think it's fascinating that you're teaching that class, and that I can only imagine over the course, given how much I've learned in this 49 minutes, just how much you get through over the course of a semester.
I certainly have a good time. I think they have a good time. And
oh sure.
And they, like every class that I have the opportunity to teach there, I get to learn things. The joy of teaching there is to be able to think with the people who are in my classes about all kinds of ideas. And they're very able to do that, very willing to do that. And so that I see as a very great joy.
So yeah, tell us about this one.
So think apple aroma, just a little bit sweet, as it should be. We try to stop that fermentation at the end, so that we leave a little sugar in it, we leave a little sweetness in it, and think caramel. So is the way I would say that. So I get apple and caramel out of that, and that's really quite good. And I can tell you that with a smoked Gouda, that would be fantastic. It needs to be some big cheese that actually works with this. But I think that
thirsty.
Yeah, I think that would be a lovely way to do that. And I can tell you that, so we've been making a cocktail at home. Lori's been making a cocktail at home using this and the apple brandy from McClintock. And then our fresh blackberries, holy moly. I mean, stick straw in it and wake me in the morning. I mean, it is so good. I can't begin to tell you. So
that sounds delicious.
I'm happy with that. I'm a miserable salesperson. So let me be really clear. If I don't like something, I will tell you. And that's, it may be why Lori doesn't want me in the tasting room sometimes. I talk too much, and B, if somebody asks me, I tell them. And
Lori, you wouldn't keep him out of the tasting room. Come on.
So that's the apple, Kevin. And we're working on the next one now. So we have it in barrel downstairs, aging and mellowing, and we're looking forward to finishing it as we get to fall this year and as we have our apples coming. And
that's
so
great.
and the one this year we're using all the way with, because we want to see if it makes any difference as we actually get to it. I don't think we'll be disappointed.
So Lori confirming that sometimes you need an elbow.
She's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so Bequest then, Bequest is our pear dessert wine, and it's made through the same process. And so once again, we ferment our pears all the way down as far as they'll go. We take a couple of barrels of those into McClintock, and they distill them and send home the pear distillate. And it's kind of interesting. So you take, we're a cidery, so it's not as high an alcohol content as many other wines. It's enough to have to be a wine, but not as high as many other wines. And so when we take, the yield that we get from from distilling at all, it's going to be a little less than you would get from a winery. And so we take 100 gallons in, and we bring 10 or 12 gallons of distillate home that then allow us to make a 30-gallon barrel, or about 40 gallons of dessert wine, port-style dessert wine. So the Bequest is the pear, and again, it's just pears. And so just as the Harley's Keep is just apples, the Bequest is just pears. And with Bequest, same process. So, it's mixed with finished pear cider, and we actually use Apparition to do that. And then we stop newly fermenting, or not new, but pears that are fermenting with that higher alcohol content. And again, put it back in the barrel for a while, and then comes the dessert wine. So this is Bequest.
So Eric, tell me, how long is a little while? How long is that in barrel?
So it's a year to mellow, and so or at least so far they've had to be a year to mellow, and I think it feels about right, Kevin. Again, we're learning as we go, but we're pretty happy about it. We had the very good fortune of being able to spend some time with colleagues and acquaintances and colleagues in British Columbia, one of whom makes a blackberry port and one of whom makes a blueberry port. And the blackberry port actually was double gold in San Francisco and the best dessert wine in the world a couple of years ago, and it's pretty good. And so we were able to spend time, talk with them, and see the process and experiment. We do some stuff that they suggested that we do, and some stuff that we thought sounded like a good idea. And so with the Bequest, oh my! So the Bequest has a little bit more sweetness than the Harley's Keep does. And if the Harley's Keep has caramel, this one has vanilla. And so you'll get a little vanilla, you'll get a little pear, a little sweet. And it's really good. And I can tell you, since we're talking about cheese, this with brie or camembert would be, and little fruit would be really, really good.
Sign me up. No, I did have this one. You were generous enough to let me sample that one. That is gorgeous.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And we're actually doing, if I may, we're actually doing 2 more, since we still have a minute or two. I can. So we're doing 2 more that we're waiting for labels for. So Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms would prefer that we add like to like. And so we make since we make Blue Note anyway, so we take our blueberry apple cider and distill it, and then mix with Blue Note, and then stock one of those to make the new blueberry port that we have just finished, that we're waiting for the label for. And I must say that it's really good. And then we've done the same thing with blackberry. And so we're making a blackberry apple port style wine the same way. And both of those are awaiting labels, and we'll be able to do a release of those. We're calling one of them Summers in honor of the family. And we're calling the other one Gracie's Calling in honor of our dog that used to help us pick blueberries, which is another story.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
So that's what we're thinking about. And then I have a bug about trying to make one with figs. We grow figs, and in North Africa they make a fig dessert wine, and I think that would be a delight. And we're thinking about perhaps doing an apple ginger or pear ginger, since we like both of those quite a lot. And I think they would be nice additions to that portfolio as well. Well,
you've got some folks beyond just me anxiously awaiting the TTB to approve those labels. So
I will. They are all. We're happy with all of them. You know, there's some I'm happier with than others, but that's always life, right? We're happy with all of them. We're proud to have our name on them.
So tell us a little bit about the actual farm, and I know did you have some hoop houses where you're trying some other things as well?
So we have hoop houses. One of those hoop houses is a fig forest where we grow about 15 varieties of fig. We actually make more money from that than anything else we do, or thereabouts.
How do you sell them?
We sell them. We typically have sold them, by the container at market. Some people buy them frozen for the winter. We make a fig brandy jam, and Lori makes a fig brandy compote would be the right way to say that, which is to say, whole figs and brandy. And so that is a canned product. So we do those a couple of different ways, but I've been jonesing to try to do a fig dessert wine. I've had a fig wine that I thought was really pretty bad, but I think as a dessert wine,
I've had a fig liqueur before.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Oh my goodness! Yeah,
that's what I'm aiming for. And so because that's kind of the direction that we
exactly
head, right? And so that's what the intention here is. So we do those, and then we have another hoop that we grow ever-bearing strawberries and blackberries and vegetables and ginger and the other kinds of things in. For many years, we've been a market garden farm, and so our farm product goes down the road on the weekends. We go down the road with our farm product on the weekend, but we're not doing that this year because of the risk involved. I mean, I think markets by and large are pretty safe places, but there's no need to add to a difficult situation.
Understood. So tell me briefly in the last minute or so that we have, what can people expect when they come out? So you offering tastings nowadays?
So Lori, so we've been talking about that.
Yeah.
What we'll actually do is offer a flight. And so, and instead of doing tastings, one can choose, it's like 4 out of 6 items on a flight that we could actually that's what we are imagining would be a better way to deal with that. And that way we can, serve you something individually that you can, outside, you can take and sit.
Almost a carry-out tasting flight.
Carry out tasting.
Yeah. Yeah, we're seeing that at a couple wineries, and it seems to be working quite well.
That feels like the right idea. And folks can also buy bottles, and, to go or to sit outside, and the other farm products, since they're here. We're working on that kind of thing these days, and so we're happy to see folks, and we actually are beginning to see a few of our regular customers show up again, and that's really a lovely thing. So we're glad about that. The weather is really miserable at the moment, but August comes as a blessing, and we'll get a couple of cold fronts come through, and life will be good again, I hope.
Yeah, well, I think we're all looking forward to that after this week.
I suspect we will.
We'll
see what the fall brings. I mean, it's been an interesting summer.
Yeah, if in every respect, yes.
In every respect, that's and I know our colleagues in the grape industry are the birds have no mast on the mountain this year, and so it means that, for example, the cedar waxwings are just all over our fruit, and they're the worst fruit there is, and there's nothing you can do for them. They don't scare. They sit there and go, "Hi, how are you? Would you like to have one? We could probably manage to save one for you."
They're such pretty birds,
Beautiful. I love them.
Yeah.
But goodness gracious, they destroyed 6 rows of blueberries over.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, the small fruit. I'm sure they're right.
So and it's that kind of it's not their fault that the mulberries froze, right?
Oh yeah.
They're just trying to make a living. So it is what it is.
Eric, I want to thank you very much for being on with us, and sorry for the technical glitches, which, as Lori pointed out, might have been me. So I switched around my Wi-Fi, and I think we fixed it. So thank you very much for being involved, and Laurie, thanks for sharing your recipe. I think it's going to be best if I try the stew before I try to make the stew. So let me know.
Kevin, I will tell you that it is stunningly good.
It sounds great. It sounds phenomenal.
I'm one of those folks who just fell into the great big vat of butter because my sweetie used to be a professional chef, and oh my, it's a lovely thing. But it does, but that taster and sniffer she had helps assure that we do bring interesting things both to the table and to the table. So
well, I encourage everyone who's listening, watching, to get out there and, as Laurie says, come on out. Look, I appreciate everything you're adding to the industry, and the cider is something special, and people need to get out there and try it. I don't know how many have tried these combinations, and certainly the Perry's with the Asian pear and your dessert wine ciders are pretty amazing stuff. So, Eric, thanks for joining us.
Kevin, it's our honor, our pleasure, and our honor. Thank you so much.
Very much appreciate that. And with that, I will sign off after 2 reminders. First, this Saturday is National Wine and Cheese Day. So have some wine, have some cheese, and take some photos to let us know what you're eating and drinking. And we'll all be envious of that. I'll try to do the same. Tag Maryland Wine, MD Wine, while you celebrate, so that we can spread the word. And then for more information about the industry, you can always visit marylandwine.com. So with that, I'm Kevin Addix with the Maryland Wineries Association. Cheers.